that has been graciously co-hosted with NASW New Jersey, as well as with the Rutgers University School of Social Work. And today, again, today's topic is the criminalization of race. We had an event a few weeks before, part of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion series. And we're going to have a subsequent one, another one coming up soon as well. For more information on the upcoming event, please visit NASW-NJ.org. And before we go ahead and move on with the moderators and the panelists, I did want to introduce our Dean of the School of Social Work at Rutgers, Dean Catherine Potter.
Thanks, Charles. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm sorry I can't see everybody in the Zoom at the moment, but I can see that you're out there. Starting to see things in the chat, which is great. I just want to welcome everyone here today. This topic, criminalization of race in America, is a topic that we could have held a forum on any time in the last many hundred years, right? Especially true as I post-slavery practice in the United States to shift to the criminal justice system, which in many ways has served to create semblances of slavery in many, many ways. Not just limited, of course, to African-American citizens of our country, but a way of thinking in America that is really holding us back. It's some people have called this broad area the original sin for this country, and I think I would agree with that. So I want to thank our students and the student organization for organizing this whole series of conversations, but in particular for tackling this particular piece of it. So thanks to Annie and Brenda, who are with us today, who I think along with Professor Dixies have done some of the organization of the series. And I want to thank our three panelists, Ms. Berry, Mr. I'm going to say it wrong, Laskas. He'll say it right in a minute, and Ms. Wang, to thank you for spending time with us, with our students and with our alumni on this topic. I very much look forward to the conversation and the presentations. And I want everyone to know that this general area of focus is something that the school is committed to, and committed to being a part of our education and a part of our conversation and a part of our transforming and doing better with our own organization. So, so welcome to everyone today, and I'll hand back to Charles to do the introductions, I think.
Great, thank you, Dean Potter. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it on now, actually, to, again, our great co-moderators today, Annie Siegel, who leads NASW-NJ, and Brenda Kodayos Tepepa, who is an MSW student who's been doing a lot of amazing work as being part of the Graduate Student Association of the School of Social Work. Yes, just to echo Dean Potter, thank you, Annie and Brenda, for moderating today. And also thank you, panelists, for being with us today.
Hi, everyone. As they've said, my name is Annie Siegel. I'm the Director of Special Projects at NASW New Jersey. And thank you, Charles and Dean Potter, as well as Brenda and our panelists for being here today. And thank you to all the attendees who have taken the time out of their day to join us. So today we are talking about the criminalization of race. And this topic is very much embedded into our social work education. And so with that in mind, we wanted to steer away from spending this time to provide that historical context to the subject at hand and really take this hour and a half to talk about, go a little bit deeper into the work and how we can move forward from here. And so I would like to start by having each of our speakers introduce themselves and speak a little bit about the work that you do and your interest in this topic. Aaliyah, would you like to go first?
Sure. So good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Alia Berry. And so first, I just want to say that it really is an honor to be here to speak on this topic that I am so passionate about, as well as join the fellow panelists who I plan on learning along with everyone from my fellow panelists. And so I'm a licensed social worker that is working as a full-time consultant with Seeds and Berries, where I do program design, training, and direct clinical services in schools, nonprofits, and government facilities. And so I'm a community-based social worker. And so kind of what that means to me is sometimes social work, a lot of times through mentoring, sometimes counseling in the community. Sometimes social work is not always found within the four walls of an agency or between the hours of 9 to 5. Right, so a community-based social worker, while still adhering to professional boundaries, which we'll talk about later, but it is kind of doing the work that doesn't necessarily, stop within a clock, right? And so what that kind of means to me is I can find myself at baby showers and graduations, but unfortunately at sentencing hearings and funerals, goal setting on the sidewalk, hugs at a red light. And so that is what kind of community-based social work looks like to me in my community. And so just kind of the lens of who I serve at this point. I mean, I have 20 years experience working with ages 0 to 60 years old. And so my focus right now, pretty much for about the last 10 years, has been to be working with gang and or violent offenders. And so not all violent offenders are gang affiliated, as we know, and not all gang affiliated people are violent, right? So that's kind of the population that I serve before, during, and after incarceration. So before, a lot of my young people who are in programs, which we'll talk about as the time goes on, during, in correctional facilities, as well as after incarceration through reentry. And so some of the settings, just to share with this particular audience who would be interested in some of the settings that I've worked in. So then as we have this conversation, definitely do put questions in the chat, like if you're interested in more about any of these settings. So before incarceration, I work with Opportunity Youth, who are overage undercredited students who have become disengaged in school. I designed a long-term suspension program. I worked in a crisis shelter, and as I mentioned earlier, a lot of mentoring just in the community. So that's kind of where the pre-incarceration work happens for me. I do avoid court, which maybe we'll get into later. That kind of piece of the journey, I don't really engage in. Then when it comes to during incarceration, I've done work in the juvenile detention center, in the county jail with state, county, and federal populations within a county jail, because federal and state inmates are also sometimes in a county jail. And then I've also worked in a halfway house. So those are kind of the DOC incarcerated settings. And then post incarceration, which is that I have designed 2 high visibility grant funded reentry programs that I help design and work for, doing clinical services, training, things like that. I've been a case manager, a counselor, group facilitator, mentor, program developer, trainer. Even as a teacher, I was doing tutoring as a basic skills literacy, learning how to spell the word CRIP, right? Because the young man couldn't spell the name. He wanted to know how to spell the name of the street organization he was a member of. So basic skills literacy was a season. So briefly, my approach to the clinical work is to validate, educate, challenge. validate, educate, challenge. So for me, I'm doing the clinical piece today on this awesome panel. First, to validate where individuals are coming from. It's a no judgment zone. It's a hear me, see me. Regardless of what my truth is, I have to understand where someone is coming from and understand why, right? Like, what are the conditions that drove those decisions? How do they see things? What is their perspective on what we're discussing? Then to educate, which is giving them life skills and coping and discussing triggers and case management, and then challenging. So sometimes people will say, well, you're not holding them accountable, Ms. Berry. You're not holding them accountable. You're just, hugging them all day, all the trauma and therapy, and you're just not holding them accountable. Challenging around victim impact is super important, that I have come to realize over the last couple of years. It is still challenging them, right, on behalf of the community. And like, we don't like when you, shoot up a school at dismissal time because your enemy is picking up his daughter from school, right? We don't like that. We don't like blood on the sidewalk. I was discussing brains on the sidewalk a few weeks ago with offenders, right? And so like the victim impact work and helping them to understand how it does affect the community and challenging them with love in that way, in a non-judgmental way, is really key. My understanding of the drivers of crime is what is underneath the behaviors. What is underneath the behaviors, which is very relevant to what we're talking about today, because oppressive systems, structural institutional racism, results in what I have found in my work is a sense of powerlessness, right? If I don't have power over money, the violence in my neighborhood, my family, my schools, my kids' schools, if I don't have power over these things that oppression and structural racism has, created in my world, then there's an imbalance of power. And a lot of times crime and some of these decisions are seeking power. There's a lot of other reasons. It is very complex. It can't be boiled down to one thing, but I have found a common trend with that. And so how do you treat that is through leadership, positive leadership, right? So I have met some of the most brilliant leaders behind the wall in a county jail, some of the most brilliant leaders, and being able to turn that leadership from negative into positive and giving them a new sense of power and reframing power and reframing identity. Because if it's not what I've been doing since I was this age, who am I? Right. And so reframing that, looking at identity paradigms and inventing and reinventing identity is kind of how I see the work and my approach to the work. So thank you. I look forward to hearing from the other panelists.
Thank you so much, Aaliyah, that you bring such a wealth of knowledge, and we really appreciate you bringing that clinical perspective. And I definitely will be thinking about what you said of validate, educate, and challenge. So moving on, I would like, Joseph, if you want to introduce yourself, and Joseph is with us bringing the advocacy perspective.
Thank you, Annie, for that. Yes, so amazing to hear about the work that Aaliyah is doing. It gets me excited each time I hear her talk about it. I just feel her passion and love for this work. It's great. I would like to, thank the Association of Social Workers and Rutgers for having me at this panel. I appreciate it. My name is Joseph Laskas. The work that I do is I work for the American Civil Liberties Union, also known as the ACLU. And we are the oldest and largest civil liberties organization in the world. The work that our affiliate in New Hampshire does primarily focuses on criminal justice reform work. And I oversee a campaign, the Smart Justice Campaign, which has two overarching goals, which are to safely lower the prison population rate while combating the racial disparities that occur within the incarceration system. I also have a reentry component of the campaign, which is to create a suitable environment for formerly incarcerated individuals, those that are on probation or parole. And I go about this work through legislative reforms, seeking things such as implicit bias training for judges, prosecutors, as well as seeking legislative reforms that would increase the training time for police officers on implicit bias and cultural diversity topics. I also work with decision makers on the institutional level for them to change policies, internal policies. I work with our commissioner for the Department of Corrections, as well as superintendents of county jails in our state, our Department of Safety, Attorney General's office. I work with each one of these branches within the criminal justice system to see ways that they can reform on an institutional level policies that they have that may be harmful to people who are going through the criminal justice system. I also do a lot of educational community events, which are aimed at raising awareness on the issues of mass incarceration and reentry and the challenges that formerly incarcerated individuals face. And this work, what it means to me is it means more than just work. It's my life. I myself am formerly incarcerated, and I've been impacted by the New Hampshire justice system. I served 13 years in our state prison, and so going from arrest to conviction through that whole journey of almost half my life, I've learned a lot about the hidden challenges, the hidden barriers, things that most people don't think about or take for granted. And this work now becomes a daily struggle for me. It's to improve not only my life here in the community, but to improve that for individuals that I know who, like myself, made a mistake, went through the incarceration system, but have been able to capitalize on their rehabilitative journey. And so this work really hits home for me. You know, the human aspect of it has been removed. Most individuals who are incarcerated are only seen as a case or a number. You know, I can remember times of turning in a request slip while I was incarcerated, asking for something, and just to get it back and say, well, where's your ID number? You know, I could have my full name on there, but they wanted my ID number. And that's what you're reduced to a number. And so restoring the human aspect to the incarceration system, so that individuals understand that these are also people's, you know, fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, family members, and how we can help them while they are segregated from the community has really been the focus of mine, of working, you know, with our legislator, working with decision makers, just opening their eyes to the fact that the system that has been created, while the intent may be good, the impact that it's having could be adverse. And so balancing that out, showing them the ways of how to better manipulate the system for all is how I've approached this work. And I'm hoping tonight on this panel, I'll be able to bring more awareness to these issues and talk about ways that the community at large can help change these problems.
Thank you so much, Joseph. I really appreciate you bringing that perspective and all of the amazing work that you've done in New Hampshire. And I'm sure we're going to get a lot more into that in just a bit. And now, you know, we have here with us Cha-Cha, who works on a different aspect of the criminalization of race in the immigration realm. So Cha-Cha, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Cha-Cha Wang. I am the organizing advocacy director for the American Friends Service Committee Immigrant Rights Program. So based in Newark, New Jersey, but now we have a satellite office in the Red Bank office in the city of Red Bank, as well as another office also in Newark, New Jersey, that house our new detention team. So I would like to take some minutes to talk about our program work. You know, I'm so glad to be here, to be with all the amazing, you know, fellow panelists, and then to share our knowledge about, you know, immigration detention primarily. and also to speak to all the students and share more information about, about our work. So the American Friends Service Committee is a Quaker organization. It's a religious organization, but most staff are not Quakers. But we adhere to, different testimonies, and which includes peace and social justice. So in the Newark office, we have two different programs. One is Immigrant Rights Program, and the other one is Prison Watch Program, where we monitor, prison tortures in prison, primarily in the state of New Jersey. And the Immigrant Rights Program has three major components. One is legal services for people who are detained or non-detained, fighting their case outside of detention and trying to get an opportunity to stay in the state of New Jersey. And we have community education piece, which is, I believe, that what we're doing here, as well as policy and advocacy. We work on the federal, state, and local level to promote a better environment for immigrants to stay. On the state level would be for the state of New Jersey to adopt more immigrant-friendly policies, including elimination of local law enforcement collaboration with immigration and customs enforcement. Because we believe that that's not what the local law enforcement agency's job to actually enforce, to arrest, identify undocumented immigrants, and then put them in the pipeline of deportation. So my program has been in New Jersey for over 25 years, and that we started with one person, and now we have over 30 staff members. We have 3 social workers. Brenda would be happy to know about this. We often, house a lot of both bachelor's and master's level, social work students to complete their field placement. So 6 years ago, we hired the first social worker, actually part-time. And that because both the organizers and immigration attorneys attorney staff didn't really think that they had the knowledge and the I think the right set of skill to handle people's needs and to provide any kind of case management. So that's when we started trying to get funding and hired our first part-time social worker. And then now that social work component has blossomed, and now we have 3 full-time staff who are certified or licensed social worker. So I just want to say that it is very important. It's a very important position in a lot of the nonprofit programs working directly with community of color and communities that have been more marginalized. So we have a lot of experience in providing legal services in detention setting. So I do want to let you know the most recent campaign is to make sure that every single detained immigrant has the right to due process, and that they would, if they cannot afford private counsel, that they could be provided with pro bono attorney to represent them in immigration court. Unlike the criminal justice system, immigrants who are detained are not entitled to public defender style counsel. So we have 2 years ago, we got the first state funding to provide $2 million or to provide counsel to about, I would say, 15% of the detained immigrants. Now that $2 million has expanded to this coming year, the governor proposed $8.2 million to fully represent everyone that's detained for immigration purposes. New Jersey needs $15 million. So we're almost there. I think halfway is a great progress. And for us, it's also really important to, educate everyone and to say that, immigration case is very hard. People have very, very limited access to permanent status. And if they have criminal convictions history, then it's even harder and sometimes impossible to get a chance to stay. And most of the time, people have come here for many, many years and have had a family, and some have become grandparents of U.S. citizen children. So it is important to know that having criminal convictions is sort of over or double punishment for immigrants. I do think that having criminal convictions affects everyone for a very long time. Discrimination, stereotypes, but in the immigration setting, if you're foreign born, you have not become citizen, then you could be continue to be detained or deported, no matter how long you have been in this country. And so I want to stop there because I feel like I'm taking a lot of time. I think I can answer, some of the questions that we're going to go through, and then continue to share information about immigration detention and how we got here, and the impact of immigration detention on immigrant communities as well as everybody else. That sounds good, Annie?
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing more about what your program does, and I'm excited to get a little bit more into that in a bit. So now that we've had our speakers summarize their experience and their interest in this work, we're gonna start a more formulated discussion with all of our panel. Brenda and I will be asking questions, and audience members, as we're speaking and discussing, please feel free to put questions in the Q&A box as well as the chat, and we're gonna dedicate time at the end to answer some of those questions after we have this panel discussion. So I want to start with Aaliyah, start with some of that clinical piece, as that's what a lot of social workers are in school to do, and work clinically with some of these clients. So I would love to hear a little bit more about your work and how you see modern day racism playing out in your work, especially with regards to the school to prison pipeline. I know you work with a lot of adolescents and have worked in that realm a little bit.
Yeah, so when we're talking about the schools, yes, like this, the criminalization of race and oppression, and as I spoke about earlier, the structural pieces definitely play out in all aspects of social work, kind of somewhat regardless of the population that you serve. When we're specifically talking about the school to prison pipeline, I kind of, reflected on a couple main pieces. So oftentimes, so I've been in schools, I've been in alternative ed schools where students were kicked out of previous schools or just became disengaged. They, for a variety of reasons, whether that was homelessness or behavior or domestic violence or incarceration, foster care. There's a million reasons why opportunity youth become disengaged from school. But, one of those pieces in regards to pipeline is that in some of the former schools that they were in, systems don't tend to seek to understand behaviors. And so I was a former special education teacher as well. Like before social work, I was a teacher. And so I was doing, behavior disorder, self-contained students. And so oftentimes, schools and systems and teachers, but more so systems, it's not personal, but they tend to see, for example, a head on the desk in the middle of math class. right? Let's just start there. So the head is down during math class, and well, that child, that student is just so unmotivated, right? He a lot of times, right? Let's also be clear. I mean, females as well, but a lot of times he is unmotivated. He's non-compliant, right? He is disrespectful to what we're doing. This is a lesson going on. He just never pays attention. He doesn't care about his life. He doesn't care about his grades. His head is down. Honestly, when we look underneath a head being down, did we ask him where he slept last night? Right? Because he may have slept on a park bench last night and like managed to get his school uniform on just enough in your first period, and he feels safe. Right? Now, I'm not saying everyone should have their head down, but what I am saying is that we need to have conversations with young people in schools to really be able to understand their behaviors, because there is so much underneath the behaviors that we don't tend to understand. And then what happens is those behaviors are criminalized, right? So now the non-compliance, and I use those words very intentionally, non-compliance, disrespectful, unmotivated. Well, now those things are playing into self-esteem. They're playing into rejection, right? They're playing into depression, because now my school doesn't value me. My teachers, think that I'm a bad student because of whatever the behaviors are, right? And so then what happens is overly punitive discipline, right? So now it's, well, your attendance is bad. I don't care that you got shot 2 weeks ago. Like, I have met inmates who told me, like, and this is why I really know the school to prison pipeline, because stories of them in school while I'm working in schools during the day and talking to them at night, I mean, there was a lot of things that happened in schools that could have prevented pieces of their journey. Again, it's very complex. It's not all just school or one thing, but so then we're getting suspended. I've heard somebody, say because he got shot, the school wouldn't let him attend anymore. You're not on the roll anymore. I'm sorry. Right. And he was already into somewhat of a lifestyle. Right. And now the school is not even opening the door for him. So, well, it's a no-brainer. 1 + 1 = 2. And now I'm going deeper into this lifestyle that will ultimately lead to incarceration. There's a lack of restorative justice. There's a lack of relationship building. And so then all of this combined with schools systematically trying to control Black and brown bodies. Right. I don't know if that was happening back in my day in elementary and middle school, high school, but working in schools, there is systems in place to be able to control Black bodies. Right. If you sneeze the wrong way, if you're not walking silently in line, right, I need to be able to control the body. And when your head is down, right, when you are not coming to school, whatever the case may be, acting out in these behaviors, now you're getting suspensions, and suspensions from 25 to 45 days. So when I designed the suspension program, a lot of those students were coming in, yes, engaged in a lifestyle or not, like their friends convinced them to pull the fire alarm. I mean, right? And that was resulted in a 7-day suspension. I don't think that's happening in other communities. So, and I don't know, because I haven't worked in schools in other communities, but they're definitely that school to prison pipeline tying into the self-esteem of young people that are of color, and tying into that piece that then disconnects me from the school. You're not my community. You don't understand me. You don't care about me. And these are systems, not the individual teachers or staff. These are systems. The system doesn't care about me, and therefore I'm going to become disengaged, which then leads to, all the other things that can then lead to incarceration. So the pipeline is very real. If anybody ever thought the pipeline was not real, this is just something that like social workers and activists talk about. No, the pipeline is very real. It does play out on a regular basis, that we are not seeking to understand what's under the behavior. We're not seeking to understand the full picture of the young person, of the entire family, right? What is going on with the entire family? Where do they get the chance to redeem themselves with restorative justice and restorative practices? So all of that piece is what the pipeline looks like.
Hi, Hi, everyone. I'm Brenda. That was great, Aaliyah. Thank you for sharing that, and I definitely feel like, as this is talked about more, we'll educate others more on just the whole pipeline and let others see that there's different systems that are impacting pretty much our whole society, our whole structure. So I did want to add and let Joseph speak a little bit more about it, because I know he, as a person of color, he's definitely had his experience, and he definitely sees how things have changed throughout, his time here. And I also wanted for him to even include, how the current pandemic has really, really pointed out these flaws in the system today. So if Joseph, if you want to talk more about how the current pandemic has really shed some light to these flaws we have today.
Thank you for the question. Yes. So one of the biggest challenges that the pandemic has provided is or poses that it's taken the personal element out of advocacy work. It's also taken the ability away for us to meet with our political leaders and really educate them on these issues, to walk them through legislation, to present to them alternative solutions to problems that are in the community. It's really hard. You can't get a hold of them. And before, I am a registered lobbyist in our state. And so, in between meetings, it was nothing to be walking down the hall and see a senator walking down and be like, oh yeah, I gotta talk to them, because in our state, all of our every bill that is going to every bill that's proposed gets a public hearing. So we get over 1,000 bills introduced a year, and so people will be showing up to the state house and to the Senate all the time to speak their minds on these issues, and being able to catch them in the hallways and talk to them for 1 to 2 minutes. Hey, earlier I heard this conversation that was going on in the committee, and I just really wanted, the question that you asked, and then you get to really just break something down to them personally. That element really was effective at not only humanizing these issues, but of really giving them that experience and guidance of as to what potential consequences are. So that's been a problem. Also, it's presented a challenge in the sense that a lot of communities are distrustful of what's happening, given the fact that looking historically back at marginalized communities, especially during situations like the pandemic that we're currently experiencing, a lot of their concerns, are disregarded or dismissed, and they're not heard or valued as deeply as the other community groups. So we've been seeing a lot of individuals have been talking about that they're just not getting access to information. They're not getting access to people who would be able to help inform them about their process through the pandemic. One of the other ways that the pandemic has also affected our work is that marginalized community groups are struggling right now really hard at trying to keep up, just in the system itself with their daily living. And this is happening to everyone across the nation. But we're seeing in our state that a lot of the marginalized community groups, they're struggling really hard. And so we've been doing a lot of work on getting basic needs met, whether it's utility bills, heating, stuff like that. It's really cold in New Hampshire right now. So we've been working in our state on getting that taken care of as well. This has posed problems for the incarceration system when it comes to the pandemic, because vaccinations, given the history of unethical vaccinations, especially in incarceration systems, that's posed a big challenge, especially for the people who are of color that are incarcerated, who don't feel like their concerns are being heard or their questions answered. So all of this has really played out. It's slowed things down. But we have to be adaptive because these issues are too important to just become complacent with the way that things are moving along.
Thank you so much for that response. It's definitely giving a lot of perspective on how things are changing this past year and how they might be changing going forward. We're still not at the point where we're back in person, and we don't know where that time will be. And so it's very interesting to think about what the future of all of our work looks like. Given that we're speaking about the pandemic, I would like to bring it back to Aaliyah. How has the pandemic affected a lot of the work you do, and whether that's in person or from the more organizational side of the work that you do?
Yeah, so the pandemic, within the streets, like with my young people that are just in the community, not court involved, right? So the young people that are just like in the community, that I serve, I would say is just more idle time, right? Online schooling is not the wave. And I say it just like that on purpose, right? So it's a lot more idle time, especially with like alternative opportunity youth. It's harder to track them down. It's virtually. And so from what I understand and working with some schools that I still work with, it's really harder to track them down. And so crime in my community has remained steady. I wouldn't say necessarily increased, but also not necessarily decreased. And they're finding just a lot of young people under the age of 18 that are engaged in the criminal behaviors, and also stress. I mean, when kids are in homes that are stressed and their parents are stressed, like that definitely trickles down. Mom is worried. I think COVID is fake, not me, but young people, right? Like, and I've heard a lot about that. But my mom is stressed. And so that definitely does trickle down. She lost her job, whatever the case may be. Inside with my incarcerated clients, I would say that's the kind of the roughest, hardest piece to kind of watch because I do work there. I'm not volunteering, but I'm there part-time. There hasn't been visits for a year. That's hard, right? And like, yes, I'm keeping in touch with my loved ones over the phone, but just imagine, like, if we are experiencing this pandemic like out here, imagine like hearing about the pandemic over the phone from your loved ones, and like loved ones dying. And like at one point early on, around like March, they asked me, like, are there tanks outside, Miss Berry? Because there was a curfew being put in place. That's terrifying for an incarcerated person to wonder what's going on outside. And the family doesn't necessarily tell me everything because they don't want me to worry. That's kind of another lapse in the communication over the phone. So I don't really know what's going on. I know my kids are in virtual school. Now they're failing. And as a father, because I work with men, as a father, I'm feeling extra powerless and I'm feeling extra trapped. Like, you're already feeling trapped, incarcerated, but to be incarcerated during COVID-19 is a lot of stress. Definitely mental health is definitely an issue. And so behaviors then result from that. And I won't get into detail, but like, it's a lot of tension. I'll say that, right? And then re-entry with the guys coming home, I would say there's less of an impact. My re-entry guys are thriving. We build virtual frameworks. So I'm doing telehealth. My case manager is case managing over the phone. Our mentors are doing biweekly touch points on the phone. We're writing DAP notes on the phone. So we have been serving our guys for an entire year virtually, and just their attitude and mindset, I think they're really thriving. They're still very grateful to not be incarcerated, right? Like, Miss Berry, I'm doing great today. I'm free and alive. What's up with the job? Right? Like, they are ready to go and they're still on fire, and like, because they just came home. So I would say that's how the pandemic is hitting those different populations in different settings.
Thank you, Aaliyah, for that. And I guess I wanted to now bring in Jaja into this because she definitely has a different perspective with the immigration part. And I'm also so glad she's part of this conversation because, you know, an immigration component has a huge, often it's not really talked about the immigration, pretty much how much it's impacted into the private sector of mass incarceration. So, you know, I would like to ask you, Jaja, how pretty much how the current immigration area right now that we're in and the detention process, how has COVID impacted that?
So so in the last 12 months, you know, the work of providing advocacy as well as legal services to detained immigrants has been extremely challenging. Oftentimes, you know, access, you know, was cut to clients, and that, you know, not to mention, you know, family members would have a hard time hearing from inside. And the from our side, I think that it's been kind of a horrifying experience because when you need to provide services to immigrant detainees, then you need to deal with two really challenging systems, you know. So one, you need to get permission from the Immigration Customs Enforcement, the federal government. Second, you need to also, you know, talk directly with the county jails if the facility is located in, is housed in a county jail facility. So that, you know, oftentimes we didn't hear from anyone. We don't know how they were doing screening, how the jails work, or private detention centers were providing treatment. We don't know how people were, it's impossible to actually keep social distancing in jail settings, as you all know. Many people died while incarcerated during COVID time in the last 12 months. And that, I'm so afraid that she's gonna come.
Mama, can you put my backpack away in my nap?
Okay, I will. Can you go? Yeah. And that oftentimes, and right now we're dealing with vaccination, right? Whether jail personnel should be vaccinated, and that, and whether vaccines are made available to detainees and prisoners. And that's still a big question. Every single jail is different. You know, they have access to different, you know, resources. They have different level of willingness to cooperate. Even the correctional staff have different level of willingness to be vaccinated, you know, so you have to reconcile all that. So before COVID time, at any given time, New Jersey housed up to around 2,200 immigrant detainees, meaning that people are detained for immigration purposes, right? Waiting to be deported, waiting to have their case heard, or simply nothing happens and they just sit in detention for a very long time and separated from their families and facing deportation. That number went down drastically. Now we are looking at any given time, there's only 400 people detained in New Jersey for immigration purposes. So was everybody released or the rest released? Not really. It's a combination of being released, being transferred, or being deported. Unfortunately, you know, because not everybody was released back to their community or their family in New Jersey, a lot of people were deported at very difficult time. We have seen, you know, their families, you know, that they left behind actually suffer tremendously, you know, without any kind of income. A mother died because her only son was deported and she had cancer, you know, really the last stage of cancer, and was in the hospital and couldn't see her son, and she passed and the son couldn't see her for the last time. many heartbreaking stories, that happened before COVID and during COVID as well. One thing that I do want to say, though, in New Jersey is particularly good about New Jersey. I know that a lot of students are based in New Jersey and will stay here. And so I do want to mention that. In, I would say, September, October, Governor Murphy signed into law to allow prisoners to speed up their sentencing, and that law is allowing up to about roughly 3,000 people, to finish their sentence early and be released. And in November, we saw a big wave of people being released, and there was a lot of news articles about it. About 2,000 prisoners were released early and went back to their families and community, which is really good. But the bad news for the foreign-born the prisoners who were not citizens yet, they were transferred directly to Immigration Customs Enforcement custody and facing deportation. So I think that those are the stories that, often, we don't know and nobody talked about. And compared to 2,000 people, 90 is a lot less, but it is 90 families, right, that's being impacted. There may be more than 90 children, who may be growing up without their parents. Because once you're deported, it's likely that you won't be able to come back for many years to come. Unless, the federal government or the US Congress, put their act together and pass a meaningful, immigration policy in the very near future. So COVID changed a lot of things, changed the numbers, changed some people's lives. But I don't think that COVID actually changed how we perceive people who are detained inside and how they are being treated. And the same thing, with people who are serving their sentence in prisons and jails. So I think the ongoing conversation should be also continue to be about what's the impact of imprisonment, right on people, and how the jail conditions have impacted those individuals on their people's mental health suffered, medical conditions suffered, and baby, I need you to go, okay? Go get daddy, okay? Yeah, go lie down, please. Sorry, it's hard to mute. Yeah. So I think that there needs to be continued conversation around the impact of prisons and detention centers on people, on our friends and community members, and that whether they should actually exist. And for us, another world is possible, another system is possible. We don't have to treat people this way. So that's sort of like the impact of COVID on immigrant detainees.
Thank you for, answering that question so robustly, and no problem at all. We totally understand in today's day and age that everybody's got a whole lot of things going on in the background. But, very interesting what you're saying about how this really is bringing to light a lot of issues that are within the systems that are affecting the work that you do. And so I would like to bring it back over to Joseph and talk a little bit about how modern day racism is playing out in your work, particularly in the development of policy and how that work affects the advocacy that you do and the ACLU does.
Sure. So one clear example that I can point to right off the bat would be in our state. There is a practice that our state police do. They have what's called a mobile enforcement team, whose job the intent is to disrupt drug trade. And what they do is they travel up and down the highway system in plainclothes and unmarked vehicles, and they look for vehicles that they suspect is engaged in drug activity. The problem is, again, I always try to talk about the intent versus impact. While their intent is to disrupt drug trade, the impact that's having is that people are going to court, and the officers who are pulling them over are saying, well, I pulled over this vehicle because, and I quote, he was speaking Spanish. Or I pulled over this vehicle because he had his hands at 10 and 2 and he was driving the exact speed limit. And in my experience, that signals drug activity. And again, this driver would be a person of color. So when we started doing a deep dive into it, we started seeing that pretty much over 85% of the people that were being pulled over were people of color, and the reasons being articulated as to why that they were being pulled over after they made the mistake of saying because they pulled someone over being Hispanic. They never said that one again, but it started being other behaviors that were criminalized that normally would not be, that it wouldn't matter. You don't follow someone for 1.5 miles and wait for them to finally cross the white line on the shoulder to pull them over for a reason, right? And these people are always people of color that this is happening to. And so this was a problem. This was an issue that was occurring, and it was resulting in more court cases because people are filing suppression hearings because they're being discriminated against, not based on actually engaging in criminal activity, but the scope of their detentions were being expanded based on characteristics or behavior traits that the officers were factoring in. And a lot of the times that we were seeing that these were race related. Also, policy-based with the prison system. The state that I live in is it's about 94% white, and Black people make up 1.8% of the population, yet we make up close to 8% of the prison population in our state. And so when I started looking at these numbers and I was seeing the disparities, I'm like, somewhere along the line, there is a breakdown that is leading to this targetization, discrimination that's occurring. And it's not just at arrest with police, because when you get arrested, then you go to jail and then you go to the court system. And it's the court system that's sending you to the prison system. So, cops don't send people to the prison. So judges and prosecutors as well are engaging in practices that we have to take a look at. We see that, one of the biggest things that we're trying to collect is data in our state, because the numbers are just all over the place for how these institutions are regulating the community. Our biggest, most diverse city has a population of 8% African Americans, yet they made up 16.9% of the arrests in that city. And this is happening in multiple cities. So we're seeing that these are remnants of the war on drug era, the get tough on crime era, and they're creating these policies, such as truth in sentencing, which is one that is in our state, which is aimed at, making it's a punishment only policy that causes individuals to have to serve 100% of their sentence without being able to earn time off their sentence for good behavior or for making rehabilitative leaps, which is the goal, is to reduce the recidivism rate. It's right. Over 90% of the people who are incarcerated are going to be returning to the community at some point. So rehabilitation needs to be the focus, and that is not what the focus is. Everything is about punishment, and the punishments are always aimed at community groups that when we see the final numbers, it's communities of color. It's the Hispanic communities, it's the Black and brown communities. It's across all of them. All the minorities in our state are overrepresented in our incarceration system. So that is one way that we see it. Policies that would, one of the policy changes that I was able to get chain involved, those on parole. I started a mentorship program in our state for people who were formerly incarcerated. You know, when I came home after 13 years, the last phone I had was an LG 4500 flip phone with an antenna out, right? I didn't know how to use a touch screen phone. I didn't know how to use a touch screen computer. I didn't even know they existed. And so all of these things that I've come through that was just really affecting my life when I came home, not knowing where to go to get a birth certificate. I started trying to put a program together that would deal with addressing those for people who were coming home. And a problem is there's a policy that if you're on probation or parole, you're not allowed to associate with another person on probation or parole, because the ideology is that if you're on probation parole, then all you're going to do is criminal activities. If you get around more people on probation parole, all you guys are going to do is more criminal activity. And you're going to just try to take over the world. Like it's ridiculous. And so educating the decision maker on that, which was our commissioner, about this policy is harmful, especially to people of color who are overrepresented in our prison systems. And when they're coming home, they're being told that they have to form this artificially forced relationship with their parole officer or probation officer, who they have seen as a captor for so long. You want them to develop these relationships, but they're not going to go to that person and talk to them when it's 1 o'clock in the morning and they feel like relapsing, or when they've had a hard month and they're about ready to go back to doing robberies and stick-ups. Like that, they're not going to call their parole officer and tell them, hey, I'm really struggling with this right now. But they'll call me, right? Someone who's been through that before. And not allowing us to be able to communicate, not allowing us to be able to meet together, to hold each other accountable while we're out here is a problem. And so it was policies like that. We were able to successfully get that changed for the program that I have started. So we're all allowed to associate without fear of our parole officers coming in hot and violating us and bringing us back to prison, which was a reality at one point. We also see policies that just, and I can't even say it's a policy because it's unwritten. It's not established, but it is data collection. We're trying to have data collection in our state so that we can show which institutions, exactly where in our system this discrimination is happening. You can't make any informed decision without data. And we at the very last second, our state leaders decided to yank the provision that would have that data collection between law enforcement and community members, which would have been a requirement. They yanked that provision. And again, this is showing that finding out where in the system this is happening is not important right now in our state. And this is something that we're going to continue to keep advocating for. But we do believe that we need to be able to see the data on when law enforcement is doing things like pulling people over and saying, oh, I'm pulling you over because of X, Y, or Z. And it's really not for the reason that they're pulled over. So the data collection piece is another one that we're definitely struggling with, our state trying to accept what is in our closet. But it is something that we're going to continue to fight for.
Thank you for answering that. It's from our previous conversations and from everything you've said, it's so amazing the work that you've been able to do and the resource that you've been able to be to other formerly incarcerated individuals. And it's very great that you're able to do all of the work that you do. And to round out this question of how modern day racism affects your work, I've asked Aaliyah previously, and Joseph, you just answered. Jaja, do you want to answer a little bit about how that affects your work and the work that you do? I know you spoke a little bit about it before when you were answering how COVID affects, but if you could speak a little bit more directly to modern day racism and a little bit more about how that affects detention.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, it's important to look at, I guess, global migration, why, who come to this country. And, a lot of time it's people from global South, and, people of color communities. And basically, people have the need there's poverty and political unrest or, war. And some of that may be triggered by, policies from the United States or the European countries. So for us, there is a sort of a need for people of color community to actually migrate into the more white and wealthy communities, in terms of, countries, and in terms of also geographic, within the country border, right? In the US, we're seeing how oftentimes, immigrants are the ones that, working minimum wage or even under minimum wage, and then, take up a lot of the jobs that, that's labor intensive, but they don't get paid very well. So this is just a little aspect of what the sort of the larger, racist system, sort of, includes, right? It's the distribution of resources. It's the, how we see, people without immigration status or coming from a poor country, or primarily, people who are in darker skin, and that, they tend to have less rights and less economic and other resources. And then if we look at the population within the immigration detention, detention facilities, primarily are Africans and primarily are Latinos. We have small percentage of Asians as well as the Middle Easterns. We have very, very few, white immigrants or white foreign born. So now it's, that is to just say that, people of color or immigrant of color are more likely to be target for immigration enforcement, detention and deportation. And then, the same, if local law enforcement agencies decide that they're gonna help immigration customs enforcement, identify undocumented immigrants, and they're not, what would be the easy way, and which is to really use, sort of racially biased, right? Methods, right? People who look Latino or people who look African, and question them first. So I think that, the manifestation of racism, sort of is in everywhere in our community, unfortunately. But I think that, by recognizing, how that has disproportionately and, unfairly treating people who are foreign born, the more we talk about it, I think the more light we are shedding, towards this issue. That doesn't just include the conversation we're having here, but also conversation that we should be having with policymakers at the local and as well as the state level. I do think that, having that kind of conversation with law enforcement agencies is very important, and including, policymakers who have law enforcement background. Yeah, so I hope that answered.
Can I have this book? Can I have this book?
Yeah, that it definitely did answer my question. Thank you so much for that perspective on it. I do want to be mindful. We do have about 20 minutes left. So if anybody has questions, like I've said, please put them in the Q&A or in the chat box. But one of the last topics we wanted to talk about with all of you is considerations for social workers who want to do this work. How can social workers get involved, and what are the next steps in all of the work that you do? Aaliyah, if you'd like to go first on this.
Sure. So just kind of working with different populations within different settings. I think that if we're talking about the population that I'm talking about today, being gang affiliated and or violent offenders, the first thing to definitely know if you are trying to do this work and prepare yourself is to not be the most popular person in the room of social workers. Right? Because I am an alumni of Rutgers Newark, and I was a member of the Violence Against Women and Children program, where I was the only one that was focused on perpetrators, right? And so just going, considering this platform and considering the audience, right? Social workers a lot of times are more geared towards victim work. And so and yes, I have done victim work as well over the course of my career, but when you then shift over to the ones doing harm, you're not the most popular person in the room, right? And so it is important, though, to give them a voice and to help them to be more understood and to be seen. And so the work is important. It just does sometimes take a lot of pushback. And I also super understand the pushback. So when I'm talking about this work in the community, right? And I'm talking about victim impact and accountability and the community seeing the offender and the offender seeing the community, and everybody is from the same community, to be clear, right? It's not people coming from somewhere else, but like, I don't necessarily want to hear or understand the person that killed my grandmother, right? And like, that's totally understandable. So it's not like, Miss Berry, Aaliyah is just out here, not understanding the other side of the discussion. It's true. I also would say not to do victim and offender work at the same time, because I have had very brief seasons of that, and it is hard. It is hard. And at the same time, when crime and behaviors traumatize us, I can go in there, and when I said earlier, talking about brains on the sidewalk, right? I can share the victim impact when I pass whatever on the sidewalk, right? And so it's speaking up for myself and for the community at large. And so I say all that to say that, like, the voice is important, the perspective is important, to bridge the gap of understanding is important, but you're just not necessarily the most popular person in the room. I would also say to definitely, when you're working with individuals who when you're a social worker and like doing clinical work and you're doing therapy, right, with individuals who have committed violent acts, some of the stuff that you hear is very graphic. Right. I've heard some things. And so like confidentiality is extremely key. Like, I take confidentiality extremely seriously, because if someone does trust me enough to share with me their innermost secrets, actions, perspectives, like, for me to go write it in a report or you hear it from somewhere else or whatever is the biggest betrayal of trust. And so a lot of times when you gain that kind of trust in a clinical space with that therapeutic alliance, people will tell you things. And so I would want to caution future social workers about vicarious and secondary trauma, right? Like, I have a vivid imagination. I've heard some things that would make your toes curl, right? Things that you thought were only on TV. And so then I can imagine it, I can feel the client, I can feel the energy, to the point that sometimes you are there experiencing that thing that they are describing. And so I just say supervision is extremely key when doing this work. Right? Yes, I see Annie and Brenda's heads, because we cannot be, and Dean Potter as well. Supervision, seek supervision. Future social workers, this is not a rogue work, right? I have 20 years experience. So if I'm goal setting on a sidewalk, it's because I have 20 years experience. So we're not talking about going rogue here, and then taking all this stuff in without support. You need supervision. You need to seek supervision. You need self-care. yes, I know they're telling us in Rutgers, during my schooling, self-care, self-care, self-care. That is not just something to, fancy to say. Self-care is essential in this work. And also boundaries, right? I just had to kind of put that out there as well, because, and that's tied to not being rogue, but professional boundaries and following ethics is also essential. And when you're doing work in the streets, like things can get a little messy, right? If somebody is, engaged in something that's not legal while on telehealth on the phone, right? Like, yeah, that kind of thing happens. And so it is important that we definitely understand our professional boundaries, right? Those people that I serve who are incarcerated don't even know my first name for a reason, right? But that also doesn't mean that they don't, that I'm still not personal. So there's still a personal way to do the work and show that you care and be sincere and genuine, while also following professional boundaries in the community, with reentry, within incarcerated, correctional settings, and to follow ethics, because you don't want to, be caught up in anything that you could be held accountable for, right? Legally, but I was the social worker. I mean, just know the laws, right? Duty to warn, terrorist off. Like we need to know what our parameters are legally, so that you can still go and serve in the deepest and most personal and sincere way, while still remaining professional, and if you want to be popular, working, with people who have done things that the community is not happy with, if you're trying to be popular, this is definitely not the lane. So that's my piece for future social workers.
Aaliyah, if you don't mind just sharing quickly, someone asked, what do you do for self-care? And this applies for everyone else, Joseph and Jaja, when you answer how to get involved with this kind of work. Please share, your self-care, because a lot of the work you guys are all doing is very important. And I feel like these students would like to know, how do you guys handle all these emotions and pretty much situations you guys encounter?
Yeah, so I would say that my self-care at this point, on the weekend, so I do the mentoring piece as well, just like mentoring young people that I met 10 years ago, right? I met her when she was 18, she's 28 now. So like the lifestyle, it is a lifestyle. Like mentoring is a lifestyle, even if the social work is put down at a certain point in the day. But I would say that the weekends, I really try to set boundaries for the weekend, like Saturday and Sunday is not work necessarily. But like last Saturday, I, dropped off a birthday gift, like on the sidewalk to a young person, right? Like that just happened on a Saturday. But I would say like turning it off when you can is something that I definitely do. And when I say boundaries, like I do mean the legal boundaries and ethical boundaries, but I also mean personal boundaries, right? So if someone is reaching out to me with a question, a case management, Ms. Berry, they denied my financial aid, right? What do I do? I want to go to college. We can talk about that tomorrow, right? Like we can, and yet there are other things that can't wait until tomorrow. But when it comes to self-care and boundaries, not everything has to be done. And when you're everything to everyone, recently I've been reflecting on the fact that like the superhero syndrome, right? And society, and we live in a society where that's valued in such a way that it's like glamorized and honored to serve at the expense of yourself. And like, we probably all in here have a little bit of that, right? And like that needs to be explored, myself included. Like that does need to be explored, because at what point like and then I'm reading a book and it said like at the funeral, everybody's like, oh, she gave her entire life to the streets, like her entire life at her own expense. But like, is that the narrative, and should that be the story? And what is really driving that work? And at what point is that what the book calls is self-violence? right? Being violence against yourself to selflessly give your all to the point that your love in the people, for the people that you serve, is not even intact. You're not even loving and serving at the capacity that you should because you don't engage in self-care. So I travel. I would go out to eat if it wasn't a pandemic. I, Netflix and chill without a like a mindless, watching a mindless TV show or something, not like documentaries about serial killers. That is not self-care. And so those kinds of things, I would say, are examples.
I can go. Let's just put it this way. There are reasons why I cannot be a social worker or attorney. Because it's hard for me to work directly with people. I have learned that, earlier on. First year out of grad school, I was a counselor to domestic violence survivors, and I think it was I learned a lot, and I think that, but I do think that from seeing so many trained social worker and also social work students, I feel that this field of social work gives you a lot of flexibility. That the beauty about it is that you can combine it with law, with public policy, with community organizing. And then you probably already know. But I also think that the stories that you, as a social worker, that you learn or you have gotten or you're from your clients are the most powerful stories, or can be. Very recently I had 2 staff members who testified at the Law and Public Safety Committee for a bill that we helped introduce in the New Jersey State Legislature that would ban new immigration detention contract in the state of New Jersey. So they told a story about human impact, the impact of immigration detention on families, and in a very, very powerful way. And that's a way to get engaged and then to be part of the advocacy and to using your skills and using, the stories and, and also to facilitate, or to support clients to share their stories, more directly. I think that's also what we would like to see and what the social worker can do. What else? Self-care. I actually find that our social worker staff are the calmest people among all the staff. So I think that, that they were able to help other staff members identify self-care resources as well as techniques and trainings. I can share one thing which I thought was very, very helpful. We got a grant from a foundation to provide both therapy and psychological evaluations to our clients who need them, as well as for to provide trainings and wellness activities for our staff members. And I thought that it took some time to get the project going, because the first year there's like bias, about using therapy and what does it mean, and for the second, this is a 3-year grant. The second and third years was a complete success. And then that I think that if you work in nonprofit setting, and very likely most of you will be, and that reach out to supervisors and people who have access to create different the work environment, and that and tell them what you need in order for you to carry on the work long term, as well as to that you can take care of yourself as well as your family. I think that be sort of like more outspoken about your needs. I think it's also really important. I'll turn to Joseph.
Yeah, thank you. So what I believe that, one of the things, and both Jaja and Aaliyah mentioned it, which is restoring the humanity to the work itself. If you're going to do this work, please keep the human aspect in it. I know it becomes easy for it to just become a case or a work over time, but for some, but when you keep the humanity in this, it sends your work to a whole new level. You're able to reach the impact that you're able to have in people's lives is exponential. Also, it's helping individuals who are going through these situations. It is empowering them. I think that we really got to focus on empowering people to advocate for themselves, giving them the tools to be adaptable to situations. When we're re-entering society, like Aaliyah said, we're ready to go. We are ready to go. We just need someone to point us in the direction of success, just point us in the right direction. So really helping individuals, helping them, but at the same time, just enough so that they're actually doing it for themselves and going after it themselves. That's a big key on the reentry side, at least for me, that's really helped out individuals. And I think that, in the advocacy world, one thing that I've learned is, you gotta know when to be a warship, but you gotta know when to be a submarine as well. And they're both built for battle, but they have two different approaches. So that's one thing that I would hope that everyone would keep in mind, is really think about what you are in that moment and how you're going to achieve what it is that you're looking to get. As far as self-care, my self-care is about to start in 3 minutes. My phone goes off when I'm done work for the day. Phone goes off for at least the first hour and a half when I'm done the day, because like Aaliyah said, the boundaries is so key. Like, when I was doing this work, I'm getting calls all the way up until the phones are getting turned off in the prison system. People are calling me, and when I see the call coming in from the prison, I would want to answer it because you can't call them back, right? So this is the moment you got to answer it and you want to take it. And then what was happening is, while I'm on the call, I can hear what's going on in the background, and it was making me relive my own bids. I know exactly what's going on in the moment, in the background, and that over time was really draining on me, where I didn't even want to answer the phone anymore from the prison because it was making me feel like I was back in prison, right? And that's not what this work is about. And so having those boundaries, establishing them on the weekends, phones off. Nope, if you need to get a hold of me, I will be checking in every however many hours. That's what I've really had to do to try to keep that self-care and boundaries going. And then the last thing is engaging. I think that it's just human nature to always look for the bad first in things. And so I always try to find the good. So I will try to find success stories to read through on the weekend, find this work that's being done elsewhere where there's a success story out of that, and just read about that. Read about something good, refreshing, because it gives me that inspiration again. It's like that cold cup of water on the, 25th mile line on the marathon. It's just that refresher that's like, oh yes, I can't wait till next week starts again. And so that's what I personally do for self-care, apart from spending time with family, which is really crucial for me, especially given the amount of time that I lost from them. So that, and just valuing the small things that you don't know can be taken. So.
Thank you all so much for sharing this. I really enjoyed the conversation. On a student perspective, we had so many questions, so much knowledge. Thank you, Dean Potter, for being here and being part of just listening to the conversation. I really hope you enjoyed it and everyone in the audience enjoyed it. Annie, if you have any more remarks, again, thank you all so much.
Yeah, all I have to say is I think we could have gone another hour. You all could have spoken for so much more. And so I'm grateful for the time that we had, and grateful for all of your perspectives. And thank you all for being here. And thank you everyone for attending. All right, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.
Yeah. Bye, take care.
All right, bye everyone.